my name is Irene, and in this video we are going to be learning how to make parametric curtains that can go on a line and free form. So let's get to it. So when it comes to modeling curtains for interior design projects, if you check on Google or the internet, you're usually going to find two approaches. So the first approach is just using model in place components. So they will do something like go component, model in place, let's call it furniture, it doesn't really matter. And then it's going to be curtains. And then basically what they will do is use something like a blend where you have a profile at the bottom and a profile at the top. So let's say that the profile at the top is going to be something like, like a wavy line like this. I'm not going to make it too complex. And then you need to give a thickness to that because it's a profile. So let's say that it's going to be 1/8 of an inch. And then they will just like close it in. So let's say from here to here. And then same thing here. From here to here. So that would be kind of like the bottom profile. And then they're going to say like, okay, and then we're going to do the top profile. And the top profile is basically just like the straight line or like a softer curve. It really depends. Like different people will do that different ways. But this is basically it. And then basically when they're done, what they will do is that they will align this to like the top of the wall. That's it. And then this is your curtain. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this method. It gets the job done. As you can see, like you can see the little curves. And if I switch it here to something like realistic, you may even be able to see a little bit of that like level of detail. See, you have the nice waves. So there's nothing wrong with this method. The main issue is that if you want to change something, like if I want to make this curtain as in, like let's pretend that it's closed. I want to like push it close. I would basically have to go and either delete this guy and make it again, or I would have to go in and I would have to edit all of the profiles. So it's not a very manageable option. Another one that I've seen that I personally find even worse is the using massing. Now, using massing is a good option if you are trying to create a curtain that has like, I don't know, like the wind is blowing and the curtain is doing this or whatever. It's doing something crazy. And then you want to basically have a variable profile along the way. But it's a little bit extra because then again, if you want to make changes, you would basically have to go to the mass, edit the mass, and then update the curtain itself because like the curtain wouldn't be the mass. The mass is the base, and then your curtain would probably be a custom wall, basically. So both of these methods, model in place component and using massing, have the issue that they are very easy to create, but then they're very annoying to edit. You basically have to start from scratch if you want to edit. So what I want to show you here is how we can create parametric curtains from easiest to hardest. Option 1 is going to be a linear parametric curtain. So this is going to be based on a line-based family. And then finally, the most complex one, if you're feeling really extra, is going to be an adaptive family. Okay, so let's see how we would do this. So we're going to start with the linear one. So for that, we're going to go File, we're going to go New, and we're going to go Family. And I'm going to be choosing here, I'm going to go Imperial. So we're going to be going with a generic line-based model. Okay, and basically what we are going to do here is exactly the same thing that we did with the model in place component, except that this time we are going to assign parameters to it. So first thing first, we're going to need a reference plane that is just going to help us model the curve. So I'm going to go reference plane at the bottom and reference plane at the top. Keep in mind, this one is not going to be parametric. Unfortunately, that's one of the limitations. The other thing that I want to do is I want to create reference planes that are going to mark basically like how many waves I'm going to have. Keep in mind, the more of these you have, the more natural, so to speak, your curtain is going to look. So I can come here and put quite some of them. Let's say that I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to copy the rest. I don't want to have to draw each and every one of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this excess here. I just want them within. I'm also going to create a reference plane in the front view that is going to control the height. And now, again, remember, these reference planes will be used either to assign parametric values or just to help us in modeling. So my height will be a parametric value. So I'm going to go from with a dimension DI from the reference level to what is going to be the top of my curtain. Now I am just going to assign that a value of H, and I'm going to make it an instance because I may have different curtains with different heights and I want to be able to control them individually. I also like to set this up to, let's say 10 feet. I like to work with numbers. It just gives me clarity. And then for here, these guys will not be parametric, so I can just assign a value. And basically what you want to think about this is in terms of like when you have a curtain that, let's say, reaches the floor, like how much space does that like wave take? It's usually going to be between 4 to 6 inches or between 100 to 150 millimeters. So you just want to give that allowance. So here we're talking about total. So you can see I was talking about 4 to 3 inches. So I'm doing 4 to 6 inches. So I'm doing 3 and 3. Okay. So, and then finally, we are going to measure between all of these little reference planes. Let's try that again. Between all of these little reference planes that I've created, and I just want all of them to be equal. My width or my length is going to be why do I keep on missing that? This is just going to control kind of like how these wave kind of like contracts, and you just want to make sure that this is equal. Okay, so you can test how your reference is working. So what should happen here is, see, when I stretch the reference line that measures the length, everybody stretches and collapses together. Okay, I'm gonna set it back to 4 feet before we start modeling. And now the funny thing is that we're gonna model it exactly the same way that we did before with the model in place component. It's gonna be a blended extrusion. The difference here is that it will be parametric. Now, before I get into modeling, I do want to clarify something. The kind of curtain that I'm modeling here, like basically, when it comes to curtains, they kind of fall into 2 categories. One is where you kind of have wave at the bottom and wave at the top, and you have a rail that either goes through the curtain or it goes like behind the curtain, and then you have hooks. And then you have the kind of system where it is ceiling mounted. So basically what happens is that like the curtain itself is kind of like sandwich at that top, and then it kind of like waves up as it goes down. I am doing that second type just because it's going to be easier. I'm too lazy. I don't want to do the waves. You know what? If this video does really, really well and everybody loves it and everybody comments, I might do the other kind where you have like wave at the bottom, wave at the top, and you have like a rail going through it. But for now, I'm going to do the more simple kind. So the trick here is that I'm going to do the same spline as I did before, but the difference is going to be that here I want to make sure that I'm going to start in these corner here and that I end on this corner here. And then those 2 reference planes that I created at the top and bottom are just going to be to define like the wave itself. And again, if you want these to be a little bit more dramatic, by all means, feel free to like space it further away. You can see that here, it's not really taking the full 6 inches, it's landing like something more in between. So for example, let's say that I'm looking at this and I would like it to be a little bit further away. So I can come here and say, well, if it's only taking half of that and I want it to be 6 inches, maybe I come here and I say like, I don't know, let's make it like 6 inches, half and half. So that way it will total give me the like spacing that I want. So just so you understand what I'm doing, if I copy here, we said 6 inches and then, oh, we said 3 inches, sorry, and then 6 inches. There you go. So I want you to see where it's going to land based on the reference that you use. Again, this is entirely based on like how you want your curtain to look like. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to go. So see, now if I go much further out and much further out, see how it's landing closer to that 6 inch threshold that I want. So now what I'm going to do here, it's a little bit messed up there. We might adjust that afterwards. But now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and forth until I get to the other side. So I'm going to speed up through this part of the process. Okay, so as you can see, this is a more dramatic wave. If you don't like the way that like the guy at the beginning and the end, remember you can just like move it to another threshold, and then maybe that looks a little bit more realistic to you. Again, entirely up to you. So now what I'm going to do, same as I did when I was doing my model in place, I'm going to create a copy that is going to be 1/8 of an inch, something like 10 millimeters, doesn't really matter. I just want to give a thickness to my curtain, and then I am going to cap the ends of my profile. The other thing that I want to do here, because I don't want that thickness to vary, so just to be on the safe side, I'm going to dimension the eye from point to point, and then I want to lock that. It may not be necessary, but I tend to be cautious when I work with these kinds of families because they can sometimes be a little bit unpredictable. So that is going to be my base. Then I'm going to come here to my top and I am going to do just a simple rectangle because again, that's the kind of curtain that I'm making because I'm lazy. So I'm going to go AL and I'm going to make sure that this is aligned with the center reference point and with the beginning and end of my length. Because again, remember that's what's going to manage the distance of my curtain. And what I'm going to do here is I want to make sure that this is also 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to make sure that I lock that thickness so it doesn't change by accident. So lock there. I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to go to my front elevation. And finally, I'm going to make sure that I align and lock the top of my curtain to the top of my reference plane. If you want to create what will be the kind of like the rail here, it's just a simple extrusion. So I would come here to my kind of like top view and I would create just a simple extrusion that is going to be a rectangle. And in this case, you can make things like however visible you want it to be. So let's say that in my case, I want it to be something like, I don't know, like 2 inches on each side. Oh God, that is a lot. No, let's make it an inch on either side. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Why are you going all the way there? Inch on either side. Yep, that's fine. And then again, if you want to make sure that something doesn't move by accident, keep in mind that you can always lock it. So I can come here and say from here to here to here and say whatever that dimension is, you're going to be equal and you're going to be locked. And that way it's not going to go anywhere. And then I'm just going to make sure that the beginning and end is aligned and locked with the beginning and end of my length once again. Now for the height of this guy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and as you can see, he's starting at the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is use align to align it to the top. And then for the height itself, ooh, I did that wrong. Let me make sure that I know what I'm working. There you go. Align and lock. And then for the height, what I'm going to do is once again, I don't necessarily need to change anything. See, like if I stretch, see how that guy stays locked? That's bad. I don't want that. So what I can do here is go with that DI for dimension and measure it from here to here and then lock that value. So I actually want this value to be something like an inch. So I'm going to come here and if it's 10, then it would be 9, 11. Sure, that's an inch. And then I can lock it here. So what's going to happen is that now when I move that reference plane, see how these guys follows? That's exactly what I want. All right, now the cool thing about this curtain versus the other one that we did is the behavior. So if I come here, I'm gonna make it, let's switch the style to shaded. Yes, so we can see it. So the difference here is gonna be in the behavior. So if I wanna make my curtain shorter, all I need to do is grab my length and just collapse it. And look what's gonna do. See, it's collapsing the curtain itself. And it's also collapsing this rail here. If you want the length of the rail to act independently, then just don't align it to the lock. You can, in fact, if you want to, you can make it a different parameter. Entirely up to you how you want to manage this. In fact, let's do that just for funsies. So I can come here and I'm going to create another independent reference plane that starts at the same start point, but it's going to come here and this is going to be, let's call it rail length. So L, and I can make it an instance parameter. I can make it a type parameter. I usually want to work with instance parameters. It's just easier for me. And let's say that that maximum rail length is going to be 5 by default. So then all I have to do is say align the reference plane this to the, let's do it on the front view. Align this guy to that guy. And oh, I need to go to the profile. So that's going to be, yeah, see, that's what I wanted to be careful about because I can see overlap in geometry and we're going to do it in the reference level. There you go. So I can come here and say align this guy to that guy instead. We're going to remove that constraint and instead constrain it to this guy. And then when we say yes, this is basically what you get. So now what's happening is that you can come here and say the curtain is fully open. So I'm going to stretch it here. See, I can bring it there and then it's fully open, right? Or I can come here and say the curtain is halfway there and then there, or you can say the curtain is basically closed. Now, the unfortunate limitation of this method is that you can see that the wave pattern kind of like stays even, so to speak. So basically, the more I crunch my curtain, instead of the waves reading bigger, they're shrinking along. So this is why you may find this option limiting. But overall, like I find that like a really good option. So now I can come here and let's try it out in our project. So I'm going to save as family and I'm going to put it on my desktop for the time being. And we're going to call it linear, right? So now I am going to, oh, right. Before you move forward, remember, you can assign parametric materials. That is one of the main things that you would do if you're working in interior design. So this would be fabric, right? And it's going to be type or instance, doesn't matter. And then I can come here and say that this is going to be my material for my railing. So this would be a rail finish. You know, like maybe you want it to be a powdered white or powdered black, or maybe you want it to be, you know, chrome or brass or whatever. So I'm going to load into my project, check out how this guy is going to behave. So the way that this guy is going to behave is, see, I have my linear curtain. Now, very important, make sure that you are placing it always in a work plane. In a face, it could cause sometimes issues. So I'm going to go work plane and I can come here and say, okay, my curtain starts, let's say here. And now I'm going to come here and say, and it goes up to there. Right? So what's going to happen here is that now I'm going to have, see, I have my H and my H, I can say that it's going to be like whatever I want it to be. Like if I want it to be, I think the height of the, 10 was fine. So I can come here and say like, what is this value here? Let's say that I want it to be, I think 10 feet should be fine, or it will be, no, it's going to be too much. So let's say that I want it to be 9.5 feet. There you go. But then I can come here and say that like the curtain itself is going to be closed. So I can come here and say, I'm going to close it a little bit. See how nice that is? This is a great option. This is going to be 99% of what you do. then if you don't like it, again, the only limitation with this one is that it's ceiling mounted, so it kind of has to go where your ceiling goes. But the nice thing is that because we have a parameter for the height, I could come here and say that maybe I want it to be 9 feet, so somewhere in between. Right? So really nice option. You can use also this for like bathroom curtains, like that kind of stuff. But again, the limitation with this guy is that, as you can see, this is a linear curtain. It can only go linear. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to mention is that once you've created your curtain as a generic model, you can go to edit family. And if you don't want it to be just a generic model, you can always go here to the category and change it to something else. Like if you want it to be furniture, I would usually put something like a curtain into the category of entourage, because it's more like a decorative element, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's where I would put it. So I can come here and say, okay, and then you can save and close. It will not mess up with your linear placement and whatnot. So the only reason that we start with the generic model already exists. Yes, we want to replace it. The only reason that we start with the generic model is because it is the one that has the linear family, but like you can later change the category. So see, now when I select this guy, it is entourage. Awesome. All right. So now we're going to move on to the next one, which is the one that is a little bit harder. And this is the adaptive component one. Now, this is the one that you're going to want to use anytime that you're not working with something simple like a straight curtain. So we're going to go to family and we're going to go to new and we're going to go family again. And this time, just to mix things up, I'm going to go with metric. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're choosing the generic model adaptive. Again, whether you go metric or imperial. So I'm going to open here. Now, the reason that this is going to be really tricky is because if you think about it, like this is a high ask, right? So we basically want a curtain that is going to have that beautiful fold, but that we're also going to be able to twist and turn in any direction that we want. So it is very important that, because basically we're going to have parts of these that we want to see moving, and we're going to have parts of these that we do not want to see moving. So this is what we're going to do. So first thing first, because we're working with adaptive components, obviously we're going to be working with adaptive points, so placement points. So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to choose a placement point. We are going to make sure that you are working on work plane, not on face. So I am going to work on work plane. It's going to be by default my reference plane. And I can start with this line here just to make things a little bit more obvious, but it doesn't really matter. You could click anywhere. So I'm just going to place it here. Okay. And I'm going to escape and I'm going to select this point and I'm going to make it adaptive. So you can choose in which order you tackle this process. It's going to be tedious regardless. So, pick your poison. Because basically what we want to do is you want to have as many placement points basically as folds you have. So if we go back to the curtain that we have here, you can see that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, right? So the more placement points you have, the more accurate it's going to read, but then also the more tedious it's going to be. So I'm going to do 10 placement points here just because I don't want this to take 10 years. But I would recommend if you want it to look good, it should be about 20 placement points. So I have my first placement point, and now what we're going to do is we are going to create 2 additional points that will control the height and the length of my curtain. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go with a point again, and this time before I draw it, I'm going to pick my work plane because I want to pick one of these like little planes that come with your adaptive points, and I'm going to click on it. So now when I place these points, I am placing it in reference to the previous point. So why am I doing that? Because if I just come here and I place a point just based on my reference level, I'm going to show you here, this point has no relationship to this other point here. And when I move this point, that guy stays behind. But I don't know if you've noticed, like the other second point that I created went nowhere. See, if I move this guy, if I move the adaptive point, this guy follows, this guy doesn't. So this is why we are picking the reference plane of the point for our placement. So now what I want to do is I want this height to be parametric. So you can see here that we have an offset. That offset can be any value. I'm going to make it, let's say 3000. But again, I'm not just going to make it 3000. I want it to be a parameter that I can control from the project. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to associate H for height. And I'm going to make it an instance parameter and I'm going to go okay. All right. So now when I move this guy follows. But also when I come here and I say that I want that to be 2000, this value here changes. Perfect. That's what we want. Now, before we continue, one important thing that I almost forgot, really, really important, is to understand the kind of like the relationship of these points. So number one, this is going to be my adaptive point. This is basically my placement point. So when I'm in my project and I want to insert this curtain, this is going to be the click, 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 click that you have to do. So because this is a curtain, a very important thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I change the orientation here to be global Z, then host X and Y. So that basically means that this point is never going to flip upside down, which is a very common problem that people have when they work with adaptive components. You want to put something just kind of like on the floor and then it suddenly flips up. If you have a global Z, that's not going to happen. And then it will only allow you to move on X and Y. Okay, these guy here, I think we can leave it as it is. It's just a reference point. It's not a placement point. It's not necessarily a shape handle point. It's just going to be there. So we have our first point, we have our second point for our height, and now we're going to do a third point that is going to be kind of like the wave. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to create a point. Once again, I'm going to set my work plane, and this time, like, let's assume that our line is going to start going in this direction. This is just mentally for me to orient myself. So I want to go kind of like offset from that line. So I'm going to pick this reference plane and I'm going to put my point. Okay, and then same way that I did the distance for this guy, I'm going to do the distance for this guy here. And I'm going to say that this offset is going to be, I don't know, minus 100. I can change that. Importantly, I'm going to make it parametric. Oh, it's really close. There she is. I'm going to make it parametric. So this is going to be W. And this W can be a type or an instance parameter. I'm going to make it a type parameter. Okay, so that is one thing. All right, and that is all we need for now. Okay, so now this is the tedious part. I have to do that 10 more times. I'm going to show the second one because there's going to be a little bit of variation. So what's going to happen here is that I'm going to make a point. I want to put it once again on my reference level. I'm going to use this line here just to help me kind of like orient myself, but you don't have to put it. I'm going to make this point adaptive, right? Same as before. I'm going to make another point, set my work plane to be this top of this point. I'm going to click here. This time, I don't have to create a new parameter. I can simply say that this offset is going to be H. There you go. So see, now these two guys are the same. And now the difference here is that I'm going to create a second point. I'm going to set my plane same way, this guy, but this time my offset is going to go in the opposite direction. So if this guy W is minus 100, this guy here has to be 100. So what I can do here is I'm going to create another parameter that is going to be minus W, so negative W. I'm going to leave it as a type. I'm going to go, okay. And now I'm going to come here and I basically want to relate these two guys. So I'm going to say that minus H equals W multiplied by minus 1. And then when I press enter, see, whatever this number is, this guy will be the negative equivalent. Or you can flip them. You can say that this guy's W, this guy's minus W. I don't care. It's like potato, patata. You're only going to really manage one of these guys, so it doesn't really matter. Don't sweat it. If I come here and I make this guy 100, then this guy becomes minus 100. So whatever makes you happy, man. All right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to speed up because I'm basically going to repeat this process 8 more times, and then we're going to see what's going to happen next. Right, so we have all of our points. So the important thing here to take into consideration is that basically you want the first point and the last point to basically have their widths different. So that way, if you want to make, like, let's say that you make a segment of this adaptive curtain and you end and you want to start another segment immediately after, you're going to get a nice curved transition instead of having these kind of like where they kind of like come together in a weird way. Okay, so that's step 1. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select all of these points here and we're going to create a spline through points. There we go. And we're going to do the same thing. Now, keep in mind, we're not picking the adaptive points. We are picking the reference points. So I'm going to come here and say just the adaptive points, okay? And then I'm going to run a spline through them, okay? So basically what's going to happen is that the adaptive points themselves are going to kind of be invisible. And what you're really going to see is these reference points. All right, so now that we have our lines, we are going to make sure that we set them up as reference lines. Let's set up this guy here as well as is a reference line. And now before we generate our geometry, we just want to quickly check how it is behaving. So what should happen here now is that when I move my adaptive point, the reference points should be, and then should move as well. And then the reference lines should move along with them. So let's test it out. Yes, awesome. Okay, so now all we have to do is pick reference line 1, reference line 2, and we are going to click on create form. And voila, there is my curtain. Now the difference, let's test it out. The curtain moves. Awesome. If you want to get bougie, you can add a profile here to this, and it's basically going to be, you know what, let's do it. You can just work with the axis of the reference line itself. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my work plane to be, let's see, is it going to highlight it? Yeah, I think it's this guy here. There you go. And now I can create like a little square there that is a consistent size or whatever you want it to be. Again, remember, you can make all of these values parametric if you want to. Oh, this is getting really hard to read. Can I usually like to work with my adaptive components on the 3D view. I know it's not ideal and it's not necessarily recommended, but I find it that my brain has a much easier time understanding what's going on, right? So I can come here and say that I'm going to align this top to that. So that is always locked to this guy. And then I can come here and say that this line is going to be, I don't know, 10 millimeters. And then I can lock that number if I want to, right? So I can come here and say, you're going to be a consistent number. And then same thing with these two guys here. I can come here and say, you know, from the reference, oh, that's going to vary. So you know what? I think this guy should be fine. Sure. Right. So now what I can do is basically I can just pick the reference line and the profile and say make form, and it's going to create kind of like the same curtain profile. Now keep in mind that in this case, like the rail will always follow the curtain. So if you want to have additional rail that is just kind of like continuing, you may have to model that separately. Same as before, you can assign a material to this guy. So I can select this guy here and say that this is going to be my curtain fabric, right? And that's going to be a type parameter, sure, why not? And then I can pick my, and then I can pick my little, I just want to pick the whole rectangle. There you go. This guy here and say that this is going to be my rail finish. Again, there we go. Again, let's make it a type and then okay. And now I'm going to bring this guy into my project so you can see how it behaves. So I'm going to go file and we're going to go save as family. And this is going to be my, I'm not saving the project, just a family. I'm going to save this guy as my adaptive curtain, right? So let's bring it into the project and see how it behaves. Now, my recommendation from experience working with this kind of guy is number one, always work in a work plane. It's going to make life much easier. Number two, because your placement is going to determine basically how big this thing gets, you usually want to place them closer if you want to get those more like crisp waves, but you know, up to you. And number three, I would recommend that you create like a model line or an annotation line that you can follow just to make it a little bit easier to do the placement. But I'm going to start just with a regular placement here just so you can see how it works. So I can come here and say, here's going to be my point 1. And here's going to be my point 2, and here's going to be my point 3, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. So what you're going to see is that the further it goes, the softer the wave is going to be, so to speak. See, so let's say that we're going to finish it there, right? And now when I go to my 3D view, wow, look at this thing. Let's switch it to shaded. Wow. And then the nice thing is like, see how this gets like, oh, it's touching that? Not a problem. You have two options. Option 1, you can come to W and you can change that value. So let's say that instead of 3 inches, I want it to be an inch. And I click here, apply. See, that's going to give me a much softer wave. Or option 2, you could come back here to my level 1 and you could move these points away, right? Because it's now you're working with the individual points. So all I have to do is tab, see, just select the point and say, I'm going to move you a little bit further, right? And then I can say this point here, I'm going to move it a little bit further, right? So it's really cool because you can really like do whatever you want. See like how this guy here is like, oh, it's encroaching a little bit. Let me move it a bit away. This guy here, ooh, tab. Oh, yeah. It's getting tricky. You can switch to wireframe. That sometimes helps. There you go. See? And I can say, okay, I'm just going to move that guy out of the way. Maybe I want to move this guy closer so we get a little bit more of a wave. And then maybe I want to move this guy closer here so we get even more of a wave. See, so very, very interesting what you can do with this curtain. So this is the way that I would go around doing a curved curtain. Now, again, what you can see here is like, it doesn't look as nice as this guy here because I have so few placement points. See, like there's too much of a distance between them. And then the other thing is that because of the curve, like it can get a little bit messy when I start, see, kind of like playing with it. So this is why my recommendation is that first you can kind of like plan out where you want to place it with a model line. So for example, I could come here and say like, I want it to start straight and come here. And then I want it to turn into a curve, something like that. right? So see, that's kind of like an interesting path. And then what I can do is I can come here for component and say, okay, let's say that the first portion of it is going to be straight and I want it to be really, really close together. So see, I'm going to do something like this. I'm not sure. Yeah, it should create it. I don't know why it's giving me that error. There you go. And if I go here to the 3D view, oh no, I know what's going on here. So what's going on here is that I think like the offset wants to go like this first. So if this happens to you, this is annoying. I may have to try to figure out a way because it doesn't rotate. One thing important to understand is that see how it never rotates. Like I would have to come here and say, oh, and then rotate this guy and see how it doesn't do anything. So if that happens to you, don't panic. All you have to do is kind of like you place it and then you rotate it. So I could come here and I'm going to show you. I can come here. Let's bring my line again. So what you can do is you can plan. This is why working with the model line is so nice, because basically I can plan out the shape that I want it to be, right? And then basically what I can do is component and I can start that shape in this, there you go, see, in this direction, it does understand how it is supposed to go. There you go. And then I can come here and say, okay, we're going to start at the same point. I may need to flip you, right? So I can just kind of like orient this as I go. There you go. And then let's say it ends there. I don't like that these guys aren't touching. So I am going to pick just a point. There you go. Move it. Let's say, oh, this is the guy that I'm moving. Let's move it there. Move it a little bit further down. Just a bit more. There you go. See? So once I've placed it the way that I want, I think I should be able to rotate it without consequences, especially if I make it into a group. Let's see if we make that into a group. No, not assembly, group. There we go. Let's call it 1 and then okay. And then I can go, oh, why is it so big? Whatever. Oh, and then let's do this and there we go. So I can come here and after I've done that, I can come here and place it whatever it is that I want it to be. So as you can see, this gives you a lot of control. And again, if you don't like, for example, like how much wave your curtain has, because it's parametric, I can always come here and say, I want this guy to be 1 inch. And then that is going to give me a much softer wave. And there you have it. This is how you can make 2 different ways to make curtains that you will have a lot of control over. If you're working with curved shapes, if you're working with straight shapes. So I hope you like this video. If you did, a like and a comment would be very much appreciated, especially if you want to see the kind of curtain where like, you know, there's a hole in the curtain and the rail goes through it. This would be more like a wall mounted system, so to speak. And so if you want to see that, make sure to comment and like and subscribe just so I can see that there's genuine interest in this. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through and I will see you in the next one. Bye.